These are crucial conversations for our time and our sector, and today's speaker is a fitting start. His friends call him Brad, but we refer to him as Owais Lightwala. He is a professor, an entrepreneur, optimist, an assistant professor in the Creative School of the Toronto Metropolitan University. His teachings and research focus on entrepreneurship, leadership, and innovation in creative industries. He's the co-founder and CEO of Psy, a tech startup that is working to revolutionize the way that creatives manage their money. Prior to that, he spent 8 years as the first managing director for Why Not Theatre, co-leading the establishment of one of Canada's most dynamic new arts organizations and producing industry-changing projects like Riser and the Mahabharata. He is sought after as a bold strategic voice in the culture sector from institutions like the National Arts Centre, Canada Council for the Arts, and Canadian Heritage. He has served on many nonprofit boards, including TO Live, Mass Culture, Amy Project, and Art Ignite. He was selected for the Invite-Only Impact Program for Arts Leaders at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, has completed the core program at the Harvard School of Business, was a 2018 Diversity Fellow through Civic Action, a fellow in the 2018 Leaders Lab through the Toronto Arts Council and the BAM Centre, is a graduate of York University's theatre program, and did his MBA at the Toronto Metropolitan University. Please join me in welcoming Owais to our virtual space.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I can hear the applause. I know it's coming from your hearts, not maybe necessarily physically. So as you've heard, my name is Owais, and I'm here to try and run a little workshop on how we're going to do some innovation in our organizations and our practices. I didn't know exactly who was going to come to this. I don't think anybody really did. So I've kind of pitched this at a very, very entry-level introduction to a methodology that I found very useful called design thinking. Design thinking is maybe sometimes people get intimidated by it. Sounds like a very fancy concept, but it really is very simple. It's just a problem-solving approach that emphasizes user understanding, creative ideation, and iterative testing. And the goal of it is basically to solve problems that people have in the real world. So how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that is effective? It came from kind of 20th century design movements, particularly out of a firm called IDEO and the Stanford Design School. If you're interested, you can look up the history of that stuff. And it was really responding to a need for more user-centric, human-centered design approaches and creativity, going beyond the kind of traditional linear ways of thinking that had been dominant for a long time, especially when you look at like things the way they're done in the business world or in engineering, where it's very much a kind of analytical, logic-driven approach. Now, interestingly, I find it very funny that like, as I go through the principles of design thinking, I think everybody here, the majority of people here work in the arts, they're going to find them particularly, resonant with the same principles that we have for any artistic creation processes and how most people work in the arts and creativity. I find that we don't always take that like creative side of what we do in the rehearsal hall and apply it to the like office where we work and to the organizations that we work. So lots of creativity happening on stage, and then everybody's business model is exactly the same, and everybody has the exact same organizational structure and the same program design, and the same kind of challenges often, which I find just an interesting loss that we don't take advantage of our own. We're the people who are supposed to be the experts at the creative stuff. This is stuff they teach in business school as like revolutionary. Nothing here is revolutionary to you. We just don't always feel like we can apply it in the context that I think we're going to try to apply today. And just to really sell you on it, in case you're like skeptical still, some of the benefits of design thinking approaches that have been documented in terms of why it's helpful is it increases innovation, out of the box thinking, improves user satisfaction. There's a huge emphasis on actually prioritizing user experience rather than the technical solution or the technical problems that are being solved, but are the user's needs being met? It encourages flexibility and adaptability. This is a big theme these days in the changing world that we're in. And how do we respond to the fact that the world feels like it's changing faster and faster? And I think one thing we need to do is develop a capacity for constantly being able to adapt. It is more collaborative and inclusive. So this is decolonial practice before decolonization became trendy, because it is inherently collaborative and inclusive, because it relies on participation with your stakeholders and with your end user or end beneficiary of whatever you're doing by design. It has been successful in a lot of different fields. So it comes out of like a very much design framework, but it's been used in healthcare, it's been used in program design, it's been used in education, business strategy, etc. I kind of use this methodology for everything I do. And there's been lots of kind of demonstrated success from this. So in case you were wondering why that's good. The other thing I just want to take a second to ponder on is the word innovation. I find that people throw that word around a lot and don't really know always if we're all talking about the same thing. I know that people know what it means, but sometimes we have different definitions of it. So the working definition I'll give you for today from my perspective, and if you feel like you disagree, throw it in the chat, is basically innovation is just finding new ways to do something that create value. So the distinction I'm making between innovation as something that creates value versus invention, which is just the creation of something new. So there can be lots of inventing happening, and I see this a lot where there's tons of new things happening, not necessarily adding value, not necessarily solving a need or creating a new opportunity. And an innovation for me at its core is this a new way of doing something that adds value? And some things that I don't think innovation is, or at least it doesn't have to be, is innovation does not need to mean technology. It does not need to mean high tech. It does not need to mean doing more. It can sometimes mean doing less or doing differently. It does not need to mean that it's something that's going to happen very quickly. There's an association of speed with innovation, but sometimes innovation is very slow and gradual and iterative and not always clear where it's gonna come from. It's not always going to be coming from the top down, from a kind of leadership level. In fact, a lot of the most innovative things sometimes comes from the bottom up and from unexpected places. So when I'm using the word innovation, if you have any hangups about that word, substitute whatever word you prefer that makes you feel good about the idea of creating value for the people we serve, which I think is not a controversial idea. I know that the word innovation has been used in a lot of business contexts to mean some things that are commercially driven, and I'm not using it in that capacity. I'm literally just using it for how are we trying to solve the problems that our communities, our users face that is going to add value for them ideally in a new way, because I'm assuming that what we're not talking about and what I was brought in here to talk about is like, how do we do things in ways that might be different, which is to me the very exciting opportunity that a merger proposes. Like you have two organizations coming together that have been doing some things in some ways, some which are very successful, I assume, some which were successful and not anymore, some maybe that were never working for you. So the opportunity that I see for these organizations is they can really take a blank slate approach and go, okay, we're starting over. What do we want to do and how can we do these things in better ways? With the core objective, again, this is like, I'm going to repeat this all day today, is how are we serving the users? So when we say users, again, this is words from like design thinking terminology, but we're talking about whoever it is that you're set up to serve. So your users could be your audiences if you are an arts organization that puts work in front of audiences. If you're an arts council, your users might be the community of artists and organizations that you support and fund. In some instances, my users are sometimes my students because they are the people who are benefiting from the teaching that I'm trying to do. So they're the folks that I'm trying to add value for. So again, users is a term that you can put in whatever placeholder you want for whoever it is that you're trying to help, whatever purpose it is that you're trying to serve, right? So far, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, so I feel like this is all pretty uncontroversial. Great. Let's move along and get to the fun stuff. So first stage of design thinking, and there's going to be 5 stages. We'll cover all 5, and each 5 you're going to get to apply yourself, is the empathizing stage. And like I said, these are literally things that our sectors in the arts are, this is our superpower. Like this is the thing we're experts at. And we deploy so effectively in the making of our work. And then somehow there's a disconnect between using that exact same superpower in the way that we structure our institutions and our organizations and the work that we do in those spaces. So what do we mean by empathizing in design thinking? It's basically about trying to place yourself in the shoes of the persons that you are trying to serve. So what is it that they are feeling? What is it that they are needing? What is it that they are seeing? And how are they experiencing the world? And obviously, same principles apply for any kind of empathy when you're trying to really understand someone's perspective. We have to do this from a place that isn't judging them, as coming from a place where we're not starting by trying to diagnose how they are right or wrong. Rightness or wrongness is not relevant. All we're trying to do in the empathy stage is trying to figure out what is it that people are seeing and feeling and experiencing? How do they understand the world? And why do they understand it that way? And based on that, what do they feel is their struggle, is their problem, is their need that they're trying to serve? This stage requires obviously engagement with these communities, with these folks. Without engagement, we are guessing. We are just trying to project our own ideas of what people need and want. It sounds super obvious. I realize every time I say this out loud that like everybody is like, yeah, of course, obviously, why wouldn't you be doing that? Why wouldn't you be in engagement? But I think the way that people engage is often also can be problematic because it is coming to the table with a lot of assumptions and then just seeking to reinforce those assumptions rather than coming from a place of no assumptions and trying to build up from the ground up your understanding of what is it that the person that I'm talking to is experiencing, and how can I really embody that perspective? This stage is very, very difficult. I find it takes so much patience and so much work, especially because a thing that you will find that I have found for sure is like users don't know what they need as the solution. What I think sometimes people understand from this is like, oh, we're just going to listen to people and they're going to tell us what we need to do. That is not what the focus of empathy is. The focus of empathizing is we need to understand what they're struggling with. They will not tell us what the right answers are, right? The right answers in terms of what the solution will be need to be. That's our job as the leaders, as the people running organizations, as program providers. We need to still figure out how to serve that, which is the other 4 stages. But what we need to understand is like, what is it that they're struggling with, and how do we get deeper than whatever the surface level thing is? So I had an angry student last week send me a very angry email about something in the assignment that was due that they waited till the last minute to do, and then they were flailing and they sent me this long angry email where they were really mad about the assignment design because they didn't have time to figure it out basically. And I was reading this email and going through, and it got like really dark, and they started criticizing the program, and the industry was toxic, and like how this was really negative for the health and well-being. And I read it a couple of times because my initial response was like, was to kind of react and defend my assignment, which I've designed with a lot of thought and care, and has a specific purpose for why it frustrated them, because that was something I wanted them to experience. And then the more that I read it, the more I realized that it wasn't actually, they weren't talking about the assignment at all. What their bigger problem was a much bigger sense of overwhelm, and something much deeper was going on for them than this particular assignment. They were in need of support on some completely different level. And I did not fully understand that. So all I did was I reached out and said, can we talk? Because I don't actually know exactly what's going on with you. And there's something deeper than what you're articulating here. They didn't actually respond, so I don't know if they're going to talk to me. But if I do get in that conversation, then what I'm going to do is ask them a lot of questions. I'm just going to be like, how are you feeling? What's making you feel that way? Can you tell me, why are you feeling that way? Can you tell me what is causing these kind of reactions? And try to go deeper than the first thing, because they're jumping to the conclusion that like what needs to happen is I need to be fired and we need a better teacher. But if they can go deeper into what is going on for them, I might get insight into something about a deeper structural problem that we could maybe solve, or at least I might be able to take a stab at. But I can't do that if I just start with the very surface level thing they're telling me. Another thing I'll say as a principle for the empathizing portion of things is you want to be careful of community consultations. And I'll say that specifically because the art sector loves community consultations. We're addicted to them. It's a thing we've learned from public sector, and I understand why they happen. It's basically a cost-efficient way to say that you talk to a lot of people. The problem with this is the same problem with trying to use Twitter or now X as a kind of gauge of where people stand on anything, right? You're going to hear the loudest voices in the room. You're not necessarily getting a good read on individual perspectives, especially perspectives that are not confident, that are coming from people who are not comfortable taking up space in a large public setting, that are maybe feeling more nuanced or complex things, or don't even really know what their need is or what their challenge is. They don't actually feel like they can articulate it. There is some value in these kinds of group gatherings, but I find when we're talking about empathizing for the purpose of like designing a new solution or program or a product or service, community consultations, large groups, completely useless. They take you completely down the wrong path. You will not, I don't find you will find that to be a helpful road towards the kinds of research you want to do. Now, you can do things like surveys. Surveys are another cost-effective thing that people love doing because they're cheap and you get a lot of data. But the quality of data I think you get is pretty low. I would say the best kind of gold standard for me has been one-on-one interviews with people where you really just sit and have a long conversation. And ideally, you're doing these conversations in a way that is open-ended, that is not starting by you going, here's the conclusion that our organization has come up with. We're going to design this program that's going to be really great for you. What we would like is your feedback on the program. That's not a user research process. What we're doing there is we're just kind of advertising the thing that we were already going to do and making sure that people say it's okay or tinkering with it. But actually starting with a no assumptions place would be, hi, what is it that you're struggling with, fellow artist? What's going on in your world? Where might be areas where you might need help? And then can we understand deeper what is it that's causing the challenges that you're facing so that we can get to the place where we can really, really say that we understand you. And ideally, if you're doing this right, you're discovering things in that conversation that surprise you. Because there are, no matter how well you think you know a community, there are no two humans that are alike. And so there has to be something there that is news. There has to be something there that is an insight that you didn't have before. If we haven't found the insight yet, if you haven't found anything surprising, this is A, it would be incredibly rare, but B, I think most likely we're not going deep enough and we're not talking to people in an open-ended way. We're still telling them what we're going to do and then asking them to sign off on it rather than actually engaging with that in a kind of genuine way. So this kind of leads us into then, what do we do with all this insight? What do we do with all these things that they've told us, that they've shared with us, that they've confided with us? And this is the next stage. This is the defining stage. Now, the defining stage, I think, is actually maybe the hardest one. Like, I think for the folks on this call, especially given the kinds of people that I know most of you to be, I don't think empathy is going to be the thing that anyone here struggles with. In fact, it comes quite naturally to folks in the sector. The really hard thing is then to go, what are we defining the problem as based on what they've told us? And what they tell you is not necessarily what the problem is, which is why also another thing I should have mentioned in the empathizing stage is like, it's not enough to just listen to what they're saying, but also you have to watch what they're doing, right? What are the actions they're taking? What can we observe about the way that people are acting and behaving that they themselves may not be aware that indicates that they have a challenge or indicates that they're doing something in a way that could be improved. But defining the problem in a way that is getting to the root cause, not looking at the surface level thing. So if I go to a doctor and I say I have a headache, any good doctor is going to ask me other questions to really get to the source of, like, that could be I'm dehydrated. It could be that I have a concussion. It could be a brain tumor, right? Like, but we won't know until we dig deeper to figure out what is the thing that we're really going to need to solve in order to solve that symptom. Because focusing on the symptom is another thing our sector loves doing. And that leads to very superficial level engagement, superficial level solutions, and people don't really feel like anything meaningful has changed. Though it feels like we're all very busy. We're doing lots of things, but are they actually going to be moving that needle? And then how much can we focus in this section also? Like, we've got a lot of feelings. We've got a lot of issues. Like, some of the things I heard from folks, I was like, whoa, this is going to take a lot of therapy to, get into. But we cannot take on everything, right? We cannot get into everything that everybody is feeling and needs in their world. So where are we going to focus ourselves and what are the things that we are going to be able to do? And then defining it in a very simple framework, which is this problem statement. The structure of a problem statement is, how do we X for group Y? So the X in this, how do we X is, what is the thing that we think is the root problem that they're articulating to us based on their frustrations, based on their desires, based on their needs. And we've hopefully gone deep enough to get a good sense of that piece of the puzzle. And then the why is really making clear and identifying in our problem statement, we should never get too far away from this. Who is this solution for? Because how do we solve a headache for someone who is not drinking enough water is very different than someone who is I don't know, who's just had a head injury, or someone who, just woke up from a 20-year coma. So we want to be clear about who it is in relation to which the problem that we're identifying is being articulated. And for the purposes of today's workshop, be very, very, very specific and small and focused and just go in like micro on one thing. In reality, this problem statement can scale. It can be as broad as like, how do we create meaningful experiences for young audiences in our neighborhood? It can be that big and that open, and it can be as specific as like, how do we, make it easier for students to come on time to my class on Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. And actually the 4 I did backwards there, but you get the idea of like, it can be very, very micro, very, very specific. It can be very, very large and macro. It can be very systemic. It can be very, very multi-layered. And depending on the scale of innovation you're trying to do, you might need very big questions. You might need a very big problem statement, or you might need a very specific one. I would say when in doubt, your statement is probably bigger than it needs to be, is another thing that I've learned along the way. Is like, I love big problems and big ideas. And so always trying to boil the ocean hasn't always helped me. I found it much more helpful with practice to try and get down to smaller problems than to always try to go for the biggest thing. I have yet to do anything meaningful about climate change. It's a really fun problem to talk about, but like, I've done a lot of meaningful things in much smaller spaces that I think move the needle in some way. But first you have to have that kind of discipline to go, you know what is the level of problem that I can actually wrap my head around right now and actually have a meaningful process and conversation with. And this is where the resource piece will come up. But right now, again, we're not there yet. Stay in the process and stay true to the problem, because we don't want to clutter our thinking yet with resource questions. Okay, this is more of a marathon or sprint rather. Marathon would be nice and relaxed. This is going to be very sprinty, but let's take a pause there and take a few minutes of a break so folks can just stand up and stretch, because I'm going to keep sprinting for the next 50 minutes with you all, if you'll give me permission to do so. I will assume that everybody is back, and thank you, Peter, for that comment in the chat and for engaging critically and not just accepting everything I take at face value. I absolutely agree with you that there is value in community engagements, consultations for certain purposes. I want to make the distinction that, like, when I'm talking about innovation and the kind of methodology that I'm laying out here, I find it ineffective to do very large groups at once, because groups kind of impose a certain kind of homogeneity that I don't think is helpful when we're trying to get to the nuance of like, what are individuals experiencing? And then from there, we might be able to zoom back out and go, what is the group experience? But it's harder to do that when we start with the group, because we sometimes lose the nuance of individuals, because people are different in groups. We are very much social animals influenced by the people around us and what the power dynamics of those groups are. And never mind the fact that, as Matt is saying, sometimes the ideas come from people who are being very quiet, or sometimes we get insights from people who are not speaking up for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they don't feel like it. Sometimes they don't want to. Sometimes they cannot actually speak. So I'm very, very skeptical of community consultations, just mostly because I'm saying this in a very provocative way to kind of shake a little bit if anybody feels like they're doing a lot of empathizing and therefore have a really good defining of their problems, and it's entirely from community consultations. That's where I want to just challenge that tendency that I see a lot in the sector, because it is a thing that we use for efficiency mostly, as a way to quickly get a lot of perspectives captured. But I don't know that that efficiency is actually serving us. But your challenge is well taken. So let's continue to stage 3 of our process here, assuming that we have been successful in really understanding our users' needs and then figuring out how do we define a problem that we can actually maybe do something about, which in and of itself we could spend a whole day on. But let's say you've got that problem statement, you've got a really good how do we statement. What are you going to do with that now? So the next stage that we're going to enter into is our ideation stage. And this is where we can now finally actually start thinking about what is it that we're looking to do, and how we might solve this. So the ideation stage is something that I think people love. Everybody loves having ideas, and everybody loves brainstorming, and everybody loves talking about this. So there's a tendency to jump to this stage often in processes where people want to start the first thing they do is that let's have an idea meeting. Let's everybody get together and let's talk about the thing, because everybody already knows that there's a big problem. Everybody already knows that, like, young people don't have enough opportunities, or that arts workers need more money, or that we need more affordable housing, et cetera. Like all these things that we think we know for sure. So if we go back a few steps, like we want to try and hold this off as long as possible. We want to really stay in that empathizing space and the defining space long enough that we have really questioned those assumptions, and We don't give ourselves permission to jump to ideas until we've earned that right, until we have really understood the problem well. There's a lot of good quotes on this, but like, maybe the most famous one is the Einstein one of like, it's better to spend, 90% of the time trying to figure out what problem to solve than trying to solve it. Because people really love doing the idea stuff. It's so fun. I love a good brainstorm. But it is exactly the fact that it is fun and not as drudgery as sitting down and doing interview after interview after interview with people one-on-one. That's precisely why that work is very valuable, and this should be reserved for when we have earned that right. So how are we going to do ideation well? Some tips that I would suggest for you as you go into ideation sessions from a design thinking methodology, at least, is quantity over quality. I know we're always obsessed with quality in our world, but in this stage, the first thing we want to do is just generate lots of ideas. We want to be idea machines. When we sit down to actually generate possibilities, the rule of numbers is really in our favor here, because a thing that has been proven time and time again is the quality of ideas actually is improved if you have a lot of them. If you take a lot of shots on goal, you're more likely to score. And what we don't want to be too sacred about at the beginning of a process is that we're gonna like come up with one really good idea and kind of commit to that. We want to have lots of bad ideas, and the more bad ideas that you put out there, this is another thing for those of you who are the kind of person who, like me, throws out bad ideas into the room. That is actually the most useful thing you can do for a group, is like help shift the thinking, help push the boundaries of what's acceptable to say out loud, help really challenge the assumptions of like what the parameters are or how far our thinking can go. Those are always the bad ideas. It's always the people who say, this is crazy, this is insane, this is not gonna, like, I don't even know I'm saying this. That's actually very helpful at this stage to really get us out of whatever boxes we're stuck in. Because I assume the reason why we haven't been able to do something effective yet with the current processes is that we haven't had an approach that is going to be something new to us. It's going to be something outside of what we're already doing. So there's a tendency to want ideas that we feel comfortable with, that feel like we can understand them already. If we already understood them, we would already be doing them, and we wouldn't need this innovation. We would need the change. So this is another space where judgment is not required. In fact, please leave your judgment at the door. Let's just embrace all the possible ideas and get people generating thinking and see how far we can go actually, and how much we can push ourselves. Another thing I'll suggest as a tip, and this is again well documented from research, do not brainstorm as a group. Brainstorm individually and then come together as a group. There's a massive tendency in groups to want to naturally gravitate towards consensus. Arts people are maybe more guilty of this than any other group of people I know, where we love consensus. We love finding consensus. We love the process of coming to consensus. We love coming together and agreeing. And so as soon as you start brainstorming as a group, the group becomes one brain and they start trying to find a agreement. Do not give yourself that structure. Start by working independently, harness that diversity of your team and the diversity of your perspectives, and actually seek out as far and far away perspectives as possible. Once you've all done that on your own, and you've come up with a whole bunch of crazy ideas, then you can come together and share them with each other, and then you can give each other feedback. But if you start by people throwing out ideas into the room, the first idea is going to color all the rest of the ideas for the rest of that meeting or the rest of that process. So I would suggest do not brainstorm as a group, start independently, and then come together as a group to actually strengthen each other. Right? Like I said, the focus for the ideation stage, the thing that we're trying to aim for is like, how many ideas can we get and how far and diverse can those ideas be from what we are comfortable with, what we understand, what we know. And if we've done that well, then we would go through again a more detailed process of like whittling down those ideas, maybe in terms of like, what feels really compelling to us, what feels really useful, what feels generative. And sometimes those ideas, the ones that we'll kind of keep in a short list, will be the ones that are like logical, good ideas, the ones that sound like the best ones. And sometimes they'll be the ones that like don't sound like the best idea, but they're scary, or they're exciting, or they're kind of pushing us in some way that makes us a little bit uncomfortable. A rule of innovation that I got from Seth Godin, who's a fantastic author that I highly recommend, recommend for this kind of thinking is if something is going to be truly innovative, only 1/3 of people should agree it's a good idea, and 2/3 of people shouldn't think it's a good idea. Is a smell test that you can deploy to figure out if something is actually truly new. And I find this all the time where, like, if everybody is like in agreement in a brainstorm and we're like, this is a great idea, and nobody has any criticism of it, nobody thinks it's bad, nobody has anything negative to say about it, we probably haven't invented anything new. We're probably just discovering a best practice, which are great. Best practices are very useful where they are necessary and where we have already solved the problem once and someone has figured it out. But if we haven't solved the problem because there is no good solution for how to get young people to go to theater, then maybe we shouldn't be so sure of ourselves. Maybe we should be a little bit unsure of what idea is going to work. We also don't need to be too sacred about like which of the ideas is going to work at this stage, and have a few maybe that we're like dating, and we don't need to commit to any one of them in particular, because the next stage that we're going to go to from here is where we're going to actually figure out what is the value of these ideas and which of them is going to like be likely to help us. So this is our prototyping stage. And the prototyping stage is really how do we bring ideas to life and get them kind of out of our brains and out of our boardrooms and into something that is a little bit more testable. And we're very much trying to take a scientific approach here, where we're trying to create something that we can put into the world and we can get some feedback on it so that we can test it. Again, this is with everything I'm saying, you know, these are very commonplace words that we use all the time. And I find like the understanding of them or the definitions of them can vary wildly. So what do we mean by prototype? What am I saying when I say prototype? I'm really saying something that is the kind of minimal viable version of a bigger idea that you can actually deploy in some meaningful way, and you can test the idea's impact towards feasibility and maybe discover some weaknesses, maybe figure out, you know, how this is going to work or not work. And you know, with any prototype, you're not going to be able to test everything involved in the idea. So depending on what your idea is, if your idea is like, we need to create a new platform. Well, a new platform might have lots of different features. It might have lots of different attributes. It might have lots of different things that it's going to do. We can't test all of those things all at once. I would not recommend that as a very, you know, good use of your time. But a prototype could test one element of that platform. A prototype could test, you know, just the piece of the platform where we say we're going to connect people. We're going to create new connections. Is there a prototype version of that we can test? Or maybe your platform is a way that people are going to be able to learn things. Great. So can we just test that learning piece? Can we just break that off and create a very small experiment where we figure out what does that piece look like? There's different resolutions you can think of for prototypes, which basically is a way of saying like, how much resource and time are we going to put into this? Very, very low fidelity, very high fidelity. Again, creation process, we're all familiar. You don't start your set design by going into the carpentry shop and saying, okay, pass me some 2x4s, I'm going to start building the set. We start with sketches. We start with very, very quick, low fidelity ideation and prototyping. And then we move on to models, and then we move on to drawings, and then finally we go to the carp shop, right? That's the last place where we go. We don't start by building the thing and then figuring out what we're doing. So with prototyping, make lots of drawings, make lots and lots of sketches. And the sketches doesn't have to mean literally sketches. Sketches can be sketches of an idea. If you think that your program is going to be something that you deliver in community, what is a 10-minute version of being in community with that idea and actually testing some key assumptions that you're making that idea relies on for it to actually work. And the key with the prototype that will help you figure out why you're doing that prototype is, what do we want to learn from this? If you haven't identified that, it's very easy for your prototype to become building, to become the launch, to become the production. So I would start by going, what is it that we think we need to learn? Because this is the part of the innovation that's scary. This is the part that we don't really know if it's going to work or not, because it hasn't been done, or we've never done it, or there's something unknown about it. So how are we going to learn something? And what's the cheapest, most efficient way to do that? Having done a lot of technology recently and building apps and things like that, I can tell you a mistake that I keep making over and over again and keep relearning is you do not need the technology in the prototyping stage. If your solution involves technology, find a analog solution that mimics the functionality and just prototype it that way first, because technology is so expensive to build and to deploy And people constantly keep doing this, where we'll build things and we'll put them out and be like, oh, why is nobody using it? And you actually don't need that. This is also known as the Wizard of Oz method of design testing, where you basically have a man behind the curtain and they're actually doing the things in a manual way. This is also actually how Uber started. I just learned this recently. Was it Uber or was it Airbnb? I think it was Uber, yeah, it was Uber, where you would go onto the Uber app and you would say like a cab, and someone in the office would like call cab companies and frantically find someone to send to you. That's literally how they began their service. There was not the technological innovation of like, there's going to be a network of drivers and they're going to magically know your location and come find you, etc. That wasn't necessary and didn't make sense until they have validated that people wanted this and it added value. So with our prototyping, we're really trying to figure out what can we learn, and then how can we very cheaply test our ideas. This is the thing that I think, we want to build the capacity for in organizations, and especially in institutions, is like a lot of experiments. Like for the bigger your institution, I think the more experiments should be running all the time on all kinds of fronts. People should be just daily trying shit out and seeing if it works in a very cheap way that doesn't involve 5-year strategic plans and like big commitments and like and our granting system does not incentivize this. It makes you want to write a big proposal so that you can get the money a year later and then you'll do the thing 2 years later. Like instead, can you have an idea today and in 2 weeks from now have some information about it, is I think much more likely to respond to your users' needs. Again, that's who we're here for, not to serve the grantors, but to serve the communities. What is it that those folks are in need of, and how can we serve them? And you see a version of this thinking, by the way, with like the way Strategic Innovation Fund is structured at Canada Council, right? There's a seed and then there's cultivate and the grow. And their idea is very much start small and do some experiments and then go to the next level and then go to the next level. The thing that I think they still build in there a little bit is a bias towards linearity. And I do not think this is a linear process. It is incredibly circular. You will have to do prototypes after prototypes after prototypes and then find that all of your ideas failed and you go right back to the ideations process. And then from there you go, none of our ideas are any good. And you go right back to I'll actually come back to this idea in a minute of the circularity of this work. So the last stage that we get to once we've done this incredible work around prototyping, and I forgot to mention this principle, is you want speed over perfection, which I think I've said in a couple of different ways now, is you want to get to that testing stage. And the testing stage is basically taking your prototype and putting it into action. And all I really need to say about this is to remind you that the purpose of testing is not to prove that you're right. The purpose of testing is to prove the ways in which you were wrong, or what can you learn from this, or how do we get closer to what the thing needs to be. Nobody is right and nobody's wrong and nobody knows anything. There is no solutions here that we're ever going to get, but maybe we can get a little bit closer. Maybe we can learn something that gives us a bit more insight as to how we might serve that user's need. And if we can do that, we might be on our way. And we will not be able to do that with just one go. We will need to do a lot of iteration. We will need to do this more than once. And this is, I think, where, again, a lot of organizational structures struggle. The capacity for rapid iteration, the capacity for doing lots of things in small ways and keeping that momentum going is often missing. So a lot of people actually do go through something like a design thinking process once for one thing, and then they kind of give up on it, and or they just kind of settle with whatever they ended up with, and that's the thing that we're going to do now because we already wrote the grant and we got the money, and now we like time is moving on, and I'm going to quit anyways. So how do we build a culture in which there is a permission and there is an appetite for lots of iteration and lots of constant experimenting? And then the challenge will obviously be, once you have figured out something is working, once you have found something that is the sparks are catching, how will you actually implement that? How will you actually translate that into a program? The innovation framework for me is like the way I live my life. Like everything I do, I'm constantly like going, how am I designing this? Who is this for? What is the problem actually? Not what they're telling me what the problem is, but what is the underlying problem? What is the craziest ideas I can think of or other people can think of for how we might go about it? And then what are cheap ways that I can test in a way that will teach me something about how I can get closer to a new way? And it's a forever process because the things that I figured out yesterday are not going to apply today. And the things that I'm going to need to do tomorrow are not going to be the things that I figured out that I was using today. So this is kind of a lifetime skill of being able to constantly adapt to whatever circumstances you find yourself in. This was, as I said, just a tasting menu to give you a kind of sense of like the shape of the design thinking methodology, which I have come to really love and appreciate for all the innovation work that I'm trying to do. I had a bit more stuff that I was going to try and get into, but I'm cognizant of time, so I just want to open up the floor to any questions that anybody has about any part that was unclear, or anything that you want to argue with me about. We have a few minutes, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
I've got a question. I'm
Yes.
I'm wondering in your sort of design thinking process that you took us through, at what point do you do your prioritization and parameter setting? You know, when you're ideating, you've got ideas that run the whole gamut of possibilities, but of
Yes.
course, we all work within constraints. So at what point do you apply the constraints? Do you test anything and everything? Do you test at either end of a spectrum? Like, yeah,
It's a
when do you do
great
that?
question. Yeah, so the reason why I didn't talk about constraints and I didn't talk about budgets and I didn't talk about feasibilities is because those things already exist. And I know that those things are going to actually be the determinants of priorities. So in the way that all of this happens for me and it will happen for you is we will have lots of, maybe we'll be able to carve out a 3-hour ideation session from our very busy lives and everybody manages to get together and we come up with a bunch of crazy stuff. And then the actual reality of what can we do from this will be determined by the constraints that you have. So the constraints are actually one of the big things that will inform the prioritization. And I try to, as a leader, try to push for like what is going to give us the biggest needle shift, like which are the ideas that are really going to create the biggest possible impact. But I'm in a position most of the time where I'm starting new things, especially where I'm like, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So we should be as crazy as possible. When you get into slightly bigger institutional context and you have more structures and you have more accountability that you need to have and more stakeholders to answer to, you might not be able to kind of go, how are we going to go 0 to 100 as quickly as possible? You might need to think, what is the 1% improvement that we can do? And then if we can do 1% every year for a large institution, that can be a lot of change. So I would answer that by saying like the constraints are going to help you prioritize, and you're also prioritizing at every stage. You're going to prioritize which feelings you're going to take on as your problem, which problems you're going to take on, which ideas you're going to start with, which prototypes you're going to test, which tests you're actually going to go through with, because even good prototype ideas you might not have the capacity. So at every stage, capacity is going to start to handcuff you again and go, you can't have everything. And that's actually a good thing. I think that is a necessary constraint for us to be able to be the most creative, is like, we cannot have blank canvases and infinite money and infinite time. We would never do anything. It's much better to say, we only have this much time and one person who has 3 hours a week. What can we do with that? What's going to push the needle the furthest with those constraints? And that hopefully that helps prioritize something and we get some kind of progress on whatever change you're trying to make. What point in the process? Every point in the process.
And might jump in.
Sure, Peter. I hope I answered that, Shirley.
And the key thing is transparency. If I'm going to submit an idea, I like to see where it's going to go and find out why or why not it is going to run or take off. And that's very important in terms of transparency and follow up from a process called consultation or whatever. And also times if I go home, I see a whole bunch of ideas and something comes up. Oh, I like that. Oh, that triggered something else I can add to it. Well, okay, I should have that opportunity to add to that list, because the list of ideas is a living document. As always such, and it should be. And that's the failure I've seen from I use the word typical consultations of that, we'll reflect your values in the results. Well, hey, goodbye. We don't see it. And where I respectfully disagree with you, my friend, if we have a document about the consultation process, I know what I'm getting into, how is it navigatable, etc., then I will buy into it. But if I don't have anything, I'm thrown into it and have to, that's the problem. So
yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you on the value of consultations. Again, I think the purposes is where I'm trying to focus in on just the specific purpose of if I'm trying to solve problems for a community or a group of people who I don't know how to solve that problem and they don't know how to solve it and we haven't figured that out, is it going to be valuable for me to sit down with a large group of people and encourage them to vent, rather than me sitting down with individuals and then working backwards from individuals to figure out what does the group need, rather than starting with the group and then trying to figure out, is that going to work for individuals? And you know what, your mileage may vary. This is a methodology. It's not like I'm insisting that this is how everybody should do everything always. So but if there's any, I realize we're 5 minutes over time and people have lives and things to do. Thank you for attending and joining us today.
So thank you to everyone that was here. Thank you, Owais, for your time. And please reach out to Cassandra or myself or our info or hello emails if you have continued questions. Take care, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you.